And then at the end of 4, he begins his ministry. He starts by moving to Capernaum from Nazareth. He starts preaching. You can add a T to that word, starts, if you want. He gets disciples, and then he goes public. And that's when he starts going from town to town in Galilee and preaching and proclaiming and healing. And so those things, what he's preaching and teaching and healing, those are going to be explained. It just says it in one sentence there. I've put in green that verse where he goes public at the end of chapter 4. And it doesn't explain what he's teaching, what he's proclaiming exactly. And it doesn't talk about the healings. But we have an example of his preaching and teaching here in the next 3 chapters, 5, 6, and 7. And then 8 and 9 will be an example of his healings. So, this is commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. What is the topic or theme of the Sermon on the Mount? If you've read it this week, maybe you can say. It's okay if you're wrong.
Basically the kingdom of God.
Exactly the kingdom of God. The kingdom of heaven. Or the kingdom of God. Matthew usually uses kingdom of heaven. The other gospel writers tend to use kingdom of God. Now, how did you get that, Al? It's kind of a vibe you got from reading it?
Everything that he talked about was what we should strive was basically good. If you look at the world today, everything he talked about was good, what we should be doing, what we should be thinking, and how we should act.
Okay, good. And how did you get the phrase kingdom of heaven out of that? You're exactly right.
Because the kingdom here is not.
The kingdom what?
The present kingdom here is not.
Oh, I see. The kingdom of heaven versus like the kingdom of this world. Yeah. So it's a tricky situation because there are many times he refers to entering and getting into the kingdom of heaven. But there's other times in Matthew when he talks about the kingdom of heaven as though it has come.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky thing. You have this already not yet situation. It's already here because the king is here when he's saying this. And he's here now. He's with us wherever we go, right? That's how the book ends. I'm with you always to the ends of the earth. I have all authority. He is the king. He's on the throne. So it's in some ways it's here, and in some ways it's not yet here. Very good.
It's here for individuals if they choose. Personally, at least.
He's basically, I think, describing the character of a true believer in order to get into the kingdom of heaven.
In order to get into the kingdom of heaven.
Which means we can't do it on our own.
Well, yeah. I would agree with you up to he's describing the character of what a true believer is, just what it's like this is a normal person in the kingdom of heaven. Yeah.
He dispels the legality and really shows that only faith through Jesus Christ will allow you to enter really a deep criticism on the Pharisees and their
religiosity. Yes. Yeah, very good. Okay. Also, he uses the phrase kingdom of heaven a lot in this sermon. And if you look at the Beatitudes, these 8 blessed sayings here that the sermon starts with, they each have a blessed are somebody for, here's why they're blessed, because blah, 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 right? Maybe they'll be filled, they'll see God, they'll be called children of God, different rewards different reasons that they're blessed. But what do you notice about the reward of the first beatitude and the reward of the last beatitude?
They will inherit the,
Not the earth. That's the third one. The meek will inherit the earth. What will they get? The poor in spirit and those who are persecuted because of righteousness. They both get what? The king. They both get the same reward, the kingdom of heaven. That is called inclusio. Which inclusio, you think of it as bookends, when you start and end with the same thing. So you can write, bookends there in that blank, or whatever helps you think about opening and closing something with the same concept. So Jesus uses inclusio for the Beatitudes and also for his whole sermon, as we'll see. Okay, now, I'm going to go through these Beatitudes, and they in some ways are the key to the whole sermon. Not that it's an outline, but it's like a microcosm of the whole thing, and it's very important that he starts with these. However, there's not a lot of explanation, and so there's a lot of different people interpret them differently. Like, for example, what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Or what does it mean to be meek? What does it mean to inherit the earth? So there's a lot of different interpretations. And it's very important to understand that when people interpret things differently, there's a good chance that one of them or both of them are wrong. There are correct and incorrect interpretations of Scripture. That's very important. A lot of people were just like, yeah, well, to me, this meant this. Well, I want to know what it meant to God when he wrote it. Or in this case, Matthew, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. That said, there's another side to this, and that is that sometimes a statement is so universally true that it can have multiple correct interpretations. For example, this is a terrible example, but for example, that's okay. I hope mine doesn't go off. But this is a terrible example, but a fool and his money are soon parted. Anybody ever heard that? A fool and his money are soon. Okay, so if my son asks me, what does that mean? I will say, that means don't spend more money than you have. Or you're a fool and you'll go into debt and then you won't be able to pay it back. And am I wrong? No, that's true. But could it mean more than that? Right? Could it mean don't...
Money on things you shouldn't be.
Yeah, wasting your money on foolish pleasures, or playing the lottery, or just things that are foolish, and you lose your money. Could it also mean that when you see someone who doesn't have money, that it's possible that the reason they don't is because they were a fool with their money? That's possible. That might be what that means. So something that's very universally true can have multiple correct interpretations, but it certainly doesn't mean never spend money. That also would be foolish. If you never spent money, you would die, probably. So that said, we're going to go through these, and there might be more you could get out of the Beatitudes than what we're going to go through, but at least this. Okay, so it starts with, blessed are the poor in spirit. The most famous sermon ever preached opens with that line, blessed are the poor in spirit. So what does that mean? And in my opinion, that line is the key to the whole sermon.
that my spirit without Jesus is nothing. It's worthless.
Yeah, poor. Good.
MacArthur says the opposite of self-sufficiency.
The opposite of self-sufficient. Yeah, similar to what Bev was saying. Good.
Yeah, but you can be poor in spirit and do very well.
Do very well, meaning,
Like the way the world looked at that.
oh, yeah, it doesn't mean that,
You go to the right school, you get the right degree.
yeah, it doesn't mean that you're poor financially necessarily, but
Humility?
yeah, there's definitely a huge aspect of humility because, I mean, if you are spiritually rich and you're like, oh, I know all the answers and I have all the education and I do all the righteous things and I go to church I'm rich in spirit. Can anyone think of a group, some of whom may be listening to this sermon originally when Jesus preached it, that could have fit into that rich in spirit category?
Pharisees.
The Pharisees. Yeah. So to be poor in spirit, to know you have nothing. I mean, we know when you're poor, you're struggling, sometimes you're missing a payment, you just can't ever seem to quite make it. It's like constant failures. And then if you're able to get your car fixed, I just remember many times driving around a car thinking, I hope this makes it to work. Ooh, hold together, okay? There was a time when for like a week, maybe 8 days, every time I started my car, I had to pop start it. It was an automatic, it was a stick shift. I had to get out and like run and get it going. So then once it got going, it was fine, and then I had to park like down a hill so that I could go once I had to leave. It's just, and then when we finally able to buy a battery, then it was like, okay, we scraped it up enough to buy the battery. Now I hope we can pay the rent at the end of the month. Okay, so that's a description of like the concept, and these people were very poor, most of them who were listening to this. What if you're like that in your spirit, just never quite able to get, I mean, think about trying to live under the law like these Jewish people were. 600 commands, trying to make it. Oh, I hope I can get this done because when the sun goes down, Sabbath starts, then I can't be working. So, poor in spirit is something like humility, something like knowing you can't do it, just acknowledging you can't make it. Yes?
It'd be like understanding, having an idea of what God is. You're trying to pursue that, and you know you can't.
Yeah.
Always
I
trying
think
to
that
pursue
concept's
it,
definitely
you
in
know
there.
you can't.
So knowing that you're unable, knowing that you can't do it, you're failing, because these people were definitely trying, but knowing that you're failing and you're unable, acknowledging that, you're going to get the kingdom of heaven. And then this sermon is going to expound that, why that concept is necessary to get the kingdom of heaven. And then these Beatitudes, while they are, each one is deep, and that's why they're not explained much. Because if you explained it all in one way, just like if you explain it too much, like the fool and his money, in one way, well, there's other ways in which it's universally true. But why might it lead to blessed are those who mourn? Is there a connection there? Does it just mean if you're sad, you're going to be happy and blessed? Is that what that means?
I think the mournfulness is of our sin. When we come to realize
Our poverty of spirit.
our poverty in spirit and realize that God or Christ is the only way, then we start to recognize our true need for Jesus Christ.
Yeah, especially before the gospel was preached here. If you're poor in spirit, it should make you grieve and mourn over it, knowing you can't do it, you can't measure up. Okay, good. Now meek. What does it mean to be meek?
I thought that was humble.
There's definitely a connection there, which I think is why it comes next. Someone who is poor in spirit and who grieves over their sin and their error and their inability, they're going to probably be meek in their dealings with other people and with God.
I always thought of meekness as kind of like what Jesus did. I guess an example was he was on the cross and they were crucifying him. And he showed meekness as if I was on the cross and you were crucifying me, you'd all be dead.
Yeah, good. Okay, so
Excessive use of power would not be meek.
it's about not asserting yourself, right? You know, if there's a limited amount of cookies and there's more people than there are, you know, the person is like, I better get up there quick so I can get one or they'll all be gone. That's the opposite of meek. Asserting yourself. Another definition is a genuine desire to see other people's interest advanced ahead of your own. Not.
It could also be like maybe not complaining or feeling sorry for yourself, or always, just being.
Yeah, I mean, if you genuinely desire someone else's interests, and then they get the last cookie, you're gonna be like, well, I'm glad they got it, not me. You're not gonna be like, oh. You're not gonna be complaining about it. So yeah, it's definitely connected. Not competitive is another way to.
I think of it as like timid.
Yeah, well, that's a really good. I'm glad you said that, because there is a similarity to timidness. However, you can also be bold and meek at the same time.
Because Jesus wasn't timid.
Yeah. Jesus was interested in other people's interests. When he saw someone else being oppressed, he was very bold. Right? So maybe timid in advancing your own interests.
Well, what's it mean they will inherit the earth? That isn't so good.
That's not good?
No, is it?
To inherit the earth?
Instead of heaven?
It doesn't necessarily mean instead of heaven. I mean, would you rather have an inheritance of $1,000 or the whole world?
No, but it
I'm just saying.
sounds like.
I see what you're saying. It's not saying inherit the earth as opposed to.
That's what it sounds like to me.
I see what you're saying. However, I think, I think these are going in order. So you're going to have to be this before you can be this. And you're going to have to mourn before you can. You're going to have to be poor in spirit and mourn before you can be meek. So you're going to have the kingdom of heaven. You're going to inherit the earth. We don't really have time to spend a ton of time on all of them. So I'm sorry we can't go into that. But hunger and thirst after righteousness. What about the first three would make you hunger and thirst after righteousness? This might be too obvious.
The truth.
Because you're falling short of it.
Yeah. And you know you don't have it. And I think that you can't understand your poverty of spirit unless you've had the tiniest glimpse or taste of what righteousness is. And when you start to see the righteousness of God, you start to see your own sin. But that taste of the wonder of what righteousness is makes you want it.
Also makes you poor in spirit.
Yes. Yeah. They're all interconnected. I would say to define righteousness, roughly something like conformity to God's character and will. You can read those green boxes later. They show the connections. But if you're hungering for righteousness and thirsting for righteousness, that means you don't have it. Right? I don't hunger and thirst for things that I'm full of. So what we can pray for in this is we can pray for God to give us a hunger and a thirst for righteousness. And if he gives you that, then you will also, in the end, get righteousness because they will be filled. They will get what they desire. Okay, and if you're hungering and thirsting for righteousness, you want righteous, you know yourself to be wretched, it's going to foster sympathy for others who are wretched, for others who are also poor in spirit. So you're going to be merciful, which would be something like compassion for the miserable. There's more we could say about that.
I have a question on that.
Yes.
One thing that really irritates me is when somebody calls himself a Christian, I read the Bible, I know this, I know the structures, I know God, and they're supporting things that are blatantly wrong. You know, God said this is an abomination, this is an abomination, this is an abomination.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, as a Christian and a loving person, I support abortion because the kid might not have had a good life, or I support gay marriage because everybody has a right because it's all based on feeling. You know what I mean? Those kind of things get me really, really upset because how can I have sympathy for somebody, you know, compassion who reads black and white, turning around telling me it's red and orange? That gets me upset.
Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. There's a couple different scenarios involved. One is that's very sad if they've been misled in that way.
It is extremely sad. I read somewhere where God will blind many people.
Yeah. But there's another one as far as calling themselves a Christian and saying, you know, if they're saying the Bible teaches this, and then they're using the Bible to support something that the Bible's against, we're going to come to that in chapter 6 here. So, blessed are the pure in heart. There's two common ways to view that. I think there's a correlation, but when you purify something, like a pure silver is only silver. It's only one thing. It doesn't have extras in it, right? Pure gold. It's an element. It's not multiple things put together. So you can look at this as your heart is devoted to one thing. It's purely focused on one thing. Then, of course, then you can branch out from there and say, so therefore, sexual impurity would be against what a heart who's purely focused on God and the things of the kingdom and righteousness would be against that. But I think, I always read this thinking that was referring to sexual purity, but I think that's one aspect of it. And then peacemakers, Jesus was the supreme peacemaker who made peace between man and God. And they will be called children of God. Now, what this means then is really some of the older versions say sons of God. You've heard someone say in the Old Testament, he's a son of Belial, right? Or in modern vernacular, people call somebody a son of something bad. To mean basically you are that. So saying you're a son of this means that's who you are inside. That's your character. So it's referring to, and when you are a peacemaker, when there's a conflict between people, when you're able to step in and reconcile them, they will, probably without saying anything, think of you in that way. Okay, last one. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Then he extrapolates that out, that last one. Blessed are, it's the first time now in the extrapolation when he addresses Second person, you. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. So because of righteousness in verse 10, because of me in verse 11. If you're persecuted because of obnoxiousness, you will not be blessed. But if you're persecuted because of righteousness, you will. And it will come, even in small ways. Okay, we have to move on. But file those away. There is almost nothing said in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount that is not, that its concept has not already been gone over in the Beatitudes. Okay, so a way to look at this, do you see the chart there on the next page, page 3? The chart, there's three main, in the body is in red, the body of the sermon is in red. There's three main topics that he discusses, but the introduction and the conclusion I put in gray. So we just covered the norms of the kingdom. This is all about the kingdom of heaven, and those are the norms. That's what life is supposed to be like in the kingdom. Now, of course, we see lots of times when we don't measure up to that, but that's what it's supposed to be like. That's the norms of the kingdom. And then the rest of the introduction is the witness of the kingdom. You're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. If you are living according to the Beatitudes, you will be light. You cannot help but be light. You cannot help but be a salt to the earth. So salt preserves things from rotting, was his primary function in the ancient world. You will have a salting effect. On the world. So
So what was that again? You went to the norms, and now this is...
the witness. It's in the gray box there.
Okay, yeah.
So the up and up above is the salt and light. So this, Jesus is not looking too fondly here at someone going off to a monastery to get close to God. That might be good for a season, but you can't be salt and light as a hermit out in the woods by yourself getting close to God. You might get the Beatitudes, but you won't have salt, you won't be salt and you won't be light. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, you want a man of God who's stuck in the thick of life. You have to be in it. Okay, so that's the introduction. Now we get to the body of the sermon. Okay, so let's turn the page. We've got other ways of outlining it there. Part 1, the norms and the witness of the kingdom is the introduction. Now the body, Roman numeral 2, is about the kingdom of heaven and its demands, what the kingdom of heaven demands in relation to the Old Testament. And of course, it begins with the Old Testament. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. Saying the law and the prophets was a way to say the Old Testament. The law would have been the first 5 books, and the prophets was a way of saying the rest of the books. And sometimes they'll say the law, the writings, and the prophets. Sometimes just the law and the prophets. Don't think that I have come to abolish them. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. A lot of people think of Jesus, they say, well, the New Testament kind of supersedes the Old Testament, so we don't have to obey anything in the Old Testament. We just have to follow the New Testament, because Jesus did away with the Old Testament. Well, that's not what he says there. He didn't abolish it, he fulfilled it. So in what way did Jesus fulfill the Old Testament?
He did all that for us so that we could enter the kingdom.
Okay, good. He did all that for us.
Well, the Old Testament was sort of looked at more from external actions. Jesus' approach was it went beyond external internal opinions.
Okay, good. Yeah, and he's going to get into that, taking it from just externals, follow these rules, to it's got to be in your heart also. So to fulfill it, to fulfill the Old Testament? Can anyone give me an example of how Jesus fulfills?
Well, he's the Lamb of God.
Okay,
No sacrifice. I mean, he's
Oh,
the sacrifice.
right. So all that stuff about sacrifices was pointing forward to Jesus.
Yeah, because he is pure.
He was born of a virgin.
So in a direct prophecy, yeah, it's real easy to see how he fulfills it when there's a direct prophecy like a virgin will conceive, and then later a virgin conceives. So he fulfilled that prophecy. But there's lots of times when it's the sacrificial system thing is not as direct, but Jesus certainly still fulfills that concept. So yeah, there are some times when there's very specific things. When there's very specific things that the Old Testament says will happen, and then they happen, and Jesus fulfills it. There's other times when it just points forward. And even the law points forward. Like Al said, all of those righteous requirements, Jesus keeps them all. Okay, just follow the way that the body of the sermon starts with the law and the prophets, because we're going to, in the whole body, we're going to have another inclusio. It's going to start and end with that phrase, the law or the prophets. Okay. Now, look at this. He says, the law is not until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. So don't set aside the law. The law is really important. And then he says, verse 20, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law sometimes called scribes, lawyers in some versions, unless your righteousness surpasses theirs, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. So that must have been shocking to Jesus' disciples, his followers in that day. Those are the really good people who can keep it all. And I'm struggling just to do what they say and failing.
And know it all. No.
Right. They're the people who have time to, memorize the whole Bible, and I have to work my farm so that we can eat. Okay, so if you look back at that chart, this is all about how Jesus fulfills the Old Testament, and then he goes through a bunch of Old Testament things, Old Testament laws and teachings. Some of it was not actually in the Old Testament. That's why he says, you have heard that it was said. It may not have actually been said in the law, but Old Testament teachings, and shows how they actually, if you understand him rightly, they pointed forward to Jesus. And like Roy said, Jesus takes it to the heart every time. So the first one is about, can someone read 21 through 22 there at the bottom of the page?
I'll read it. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell.
So, is Jesus saying, I'm taking care of the Old Testament, you don't have to obey the Old Testament, you can murder as long as you don't get angry, or say Raka, or say you fool? No, he's not abolishing the Old Testament. You still can't murder. What's he doing there?
He's saying you're still going to pay for your crime, basically.
Okay, good.
And that if you have it in your heart, even if you don't physically accomplish the murder, but you really would like to, but you don't.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. He takes it to the heart issue. And it is a way of revealing maybe you're a little more poor in spirit than you think you are. Those of you who, I've never killed anybody. I've heard people say that so many times. I've never killed anybody. Okay, well, have you ever called anyone an insult? Like, Raka's like blockhead. Right? You ever? I hear not Raka, but I hear words like that constantly from my children. I didn't teach them some of those words. Okay, so what is this passage is about? I think I left a blank for you. It's about, what does it say? Which side did I leave? Oh yeah, it's about anger and reconciliation. In each of these, Jesus gives a law and then says, here's what it really means. Here's how you take it to your heart. And here's what you should be doing. And here's how it points forward to me. Anger and reconciliation.
I have a question.
Yes.
In mine it says, was angry with your brother or sister without a cause. There are times when you're going to be angry with people and you're right.
Yeah. What version do you have?
King James.
Yeah, well, that's one of the situations where there's a manuscript difference. So there's 5,000 ancient manuscripts of the New Testament. And there's a few copyist errors, like someone accidentally wrote the word the twice instead of once. There's those kinds of things. This is one of the times when it actually makes a little bit of a difference. Usually it's obvious.
Right.
Okay, well, they just repeated that word. That's obvious that the Holy Spirit
The
didn't.
problem with this is that there are times when you're going to be angry, and nothing in your heart is going to stop you.
Well, there are times when Jesus was angry.
Right, and he didn't say, "Oh, I'm not angry." He was angry to let people know it.
Yes. Here is a great rule of thumb for that. It's very easy to trick yourself into thinking it's okay for me to be angry in this situation because that was wrong. So this is righteous indignation. Raise your hand if you heard the term righteous indignation. Okay. Keep your hand up if you heard it from someone who's kind of a jerk. Here's a good rule of thumb. Whenever you're righteously indignant at something being wrong, if the wrong is done to you, you need to stop being angry. Okay? Because if you've ever been in a situation where you're going to pay for something, like in a line with a clerk, and they charged you like too much, and you're like, the whole reason I got this was because it was on sale for $10, and you're charging me $25? It's not the issue. It's just, it's wrong. There was a big advertisement, $10, and I got it, and now you're trying to charge me more. It's not even about the $15. I'd be okay with paying the $15, but this is wrong. And you're getting mad. You're like, get the manager down here, because this needs to be set right. Okay? You might feel very justified in getting upset and angry. But have you ever been in the other side of the line where someone up there is upset about a price? And are you thinking, that's not right that they're being cheated? I hope they get the manager down here. I hope they work it all out because I want the right thing to be done. I don't care how long I have to stand here. I want that person to save those $15. You don't get righteously indignant when it's somebody else. So whenever you're in the situation when you're upset and it's involving you, that's a big red flag to say, you need to stop being angry.
I'm thinking a lot more of what's going on in the world.
Well, okay, yeah.
But the only thing with that is that trying to learn in the Bible, God said it would be that way. So it's still hard to balance out when someone's doing something and you know that's killing people,
Well,
but you don't care.
if it makes you feel any better, the audience that Jesus was talking to, their world was worse than ours.
Well,
There was-
depends what part of the world you go to today, because there are places just as bad as that.
Okay, but I'm just saying for us in our lives, there's bad things happening, but I mean, sometimes it was very bad in the ancient world. I mean, you might say, oh, there's this terrible slaughter of people and unnecessary wars and killings. Well, I mean, the Roman Empire was built on unnecessary wars and killings.
But there's still places in the world where they crucify people.
Yeah.
Still just as bad. Smaller and not as much, but there are a few places that are.
Yes, but it was commonplace in the Roman Empire. They invented it. Anyway, we need to not get hung up on that.
Yep.
But things have always been bad. Things always will be bad. I'm not going to go through each of these: adultery, impurity, oaths, and truthfulness. You don't have to fill in these blanks. We need to move through. But he goes through all these Old Testament things and shows, here's what the law really intended. It didn't intend for you to just make a construct where, okay, I can keep that law, I can check that box, and then I can think whatever I want in my heart. He was saying, this is what it was intended, and this is how it points to me.
I think if you hold it in your heart, that's what makes it wrong. When you are mad and you're angry and it stays in your heart.
Yeah, well, yes, I agree. That's going to make it worse. Sometimes you shouldn't even have it there for a second. Sometimes it's a mark of immaturity if you're getting angry. But, okay, so let's look at page 6, the last one. I mean, he even says here, if someone hits you, just be meek and silent and let yourself be abused and just take another hit. Very famous, turn the other cheek. So the conclusion of this whole section is in verse 48 on page 6. Could somebody read that?
Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
So he goes through, he takes about 6 Old Testament laws and says this is how you really need to be. It's not love your neighbor and hate your enemy. It's love your neighbor and love your enemy. Be perfect. Okay, so let's turn to page 7 and look at the outline there. That was Roman numeral 2, and the conclusion of all those. So he says the general concept was Jesus fulfills the Old Testament, and then he applies it to those 5 or 6 Old Testament laws, and the conclusion is a demand for perfection. The kingdom demands perfection. Now, Roman numeral 3 is about religious hypocrisy. Ruth, can you read verse 6 there at the bottom of page 7?
Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven.
Okay, why? That's the principle, and then he's going to give examples with alms and prayer and fasting. Why this principle here and now in the sermon? He just finished a big section about here's what the law really is about. It's not just, a list of rules. Why now get into, don't just do it to be seen by others.
I think he's using the example of Pharisees and Sadducees.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said, Roy.
I said because nobody's righteous, we still have the sin nature.
Because nobody's righteous. Okay, good. And you were saying about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Yeah, there were definitely people who did it.
Yeah, the people saw that all the time, and quite often, the people out there doing it were also practicing extortion and other known.
Yeah, but that's very good. But I want to take it.
Their motives were wrong.
It's very important with the Sermon on the Mount that in every possible situation, you don't say, yeah, so-and-so needs to read this. Every time, you point it to yourself. Because this whole sermon starts out with, blessed are the poor in spirit. The poor in spirit are not like, oh man, those sinners out there, well, so-and-so in the church, they're a big hypocrite. That's not what this is for. This is for you to examine your own heart. You cannot understand this sermon unless you start out with the very opening line, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek." It's so easy, and I've heard people use it for the exact opposite purpose of what Jesus preached it. They, instead of using it to examine their hearts and realize their sin, they're using it as a shield so they don't have to examine their hearts. So, if you are listening to Jesus' sermon and you're like, I need to, maybe I never killed anybody, but I get really angry. Or maybe I never committed adultery, but I lust, and that's just as bad. I've done it in my heart. And you go through those, and you really want to, and you start to hunger for righteousness and thirst for righteousness. Now, at that point, there is a big danger for you. There is a temptation to start to do it so other people see it. You learn, I want to be loving to my enemies. And I want to be a peacemaker. And when you start to do that and people start to say, wow, you really handled that great. You're a person of God.
You yourself shouldn't have to say that to yourself. Others don't see it in you.
Yes, and when they see it in you, how does it make you feel? Good. And so what happens is it feels good, and sometimes you do it so that others will see it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's...
God knows when you're being sincere and when you're not.
That's right. Yes, God definitely knows. So he's saying, don't do it to be seen by others. It's a huge temptation.
Like the hypocrite.
Yeah, and I would say that at every step in our walk with God, there is a temptation to hypocrisy. And we're going to come back to, Jesus will come back to it. But let's look at the principles. Alms, he said, give in secret. Then your Father who sees in secret will reward you. What reward are you seeking? When you do something righteous, there is a natural reward and there is a natural respect that it gets, but it's always a temptation to start doing it for that.
Your rewards are in heaven. You don't do it on earth.
I know, but sometimes the reward is somebody saying, wow, that was really great. That was really kind of you.
Praise from man instead of praise from
Yeah.
God.
It's a...
Because if you've already received your praise from man, then God's like, all right, so that's...
It's a core issue in a sermon about righteousness, because every other kind of sin, the more you do the good side, the less you want that. The more generous and compassionate you are, the less you want to take from people. You want to give. You love to give. So every other kind of righteousness, it gets easier, and you start to see the beauty of it. But the humility, as you progress in righteousness, it gets more difficult, because it's always right there.
If you get public acceptance, God says, well, you've already got
And that's your reward. Yeah.
and in heaven's for you.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, in the giving in secret, and then the prayer in secret, and then in all three of these main sections, there's always a little side note that Jesus puts in there. In the hypocrisy section, the side note is the Lord's Prayer. So he says, do your giving in private, do your praying in private, and do your fasting in private. On the praying section, he gives a model prayer, which I'm sure you've heard sermons on, so we are not going to cover it. I'm sorry. Okay, so that gets us through Jesus fulfills the Old Testament law, and then the examples and the concluding commands. You see that? The anger, lust, honesty, self-sacrifice, and love. And the concluding command is be perfect. Now the hypocrisy section. And the examples in that section are the alms, the prayer, and the fasting. And the concluding command is here at the bottom of the page. Ruth, could you read 19 and 20 and 21? Right there.
Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also.
So the concluding command is about, the concluding command is always sort of something like a summary of the whole section. Where are you going to place your value? On rewards now, with people seeing it, respect or whatever you're trying to get, or rewards in heaven. Okay. Now, there are actually, if you look at Roman numeral 4, unswerving loyalty to the kingdom values, there's 3. There's treasure, light, and slavery. 3 examples. Verse 24 on page 10 says, you cannot serve both God and money. So that's another example of where's your treasure. Okay. After those kingdom perspectives about where's your loyalty, what kind of treasure are you seeking for, earthly or heavenly, there is another section. Outline says uncompromised trust, and there's a general principle, and there's examples. And can anyone find from the first verse, what do you think the general principle is? Worry. Good. Worry about your life. And page 10. And then what do you think are the examples they use? Don't worry about your life. Okay, yes. Well, there's... clothes, food, and drink, and then the birds are the answer. He's like, don't worry about clothes, food, and drink, your physical needs. Here's my evidence. Look at the birds. Do they worry? Does God provide for them? Yes. Now, in our day and age, we could probably add a couple more things to that list besides clothes, food, and drink. Maybe, a place to live.
Look at the lilies of the valleys, they're beautiful.
Yeah.
I take care of them, why can't I take care of you?
That's exactly right. So, uncompromised trust. Now, look down at verse 32.
Verse 34 says that it's kind of a conclusion.
Yeah, it is a nice summary. But verse 32, notice that the pagans run after all those other things. And your heavenly Father knows you need them. Verse 33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. So, external, internal. You're seeking personal righteousness, conformity to the norms of the kingdom, but you're also seeking to expand the kingdom, right? So serving in your local church or sharing the gospel. Those two things go together because your own personal righteousness will be a witness. So seek that, and you'll get all the needs as well. So if you look at the next page, page 11, the whole section about don't seek earthly needs, and then in parentheses I put seek K. K stands for kingdom. Obviously it wouldn't fit there. So don't seek earthly needs, seek the kingdom. And the examples are food, drink, and clothing. And then, now you notice I've added a little symbol there at the end of the food, drink, and clothing, before the concluding command. Scales. Now, based on what you see at the bottom of that page, verse 7, what do you think those scales represent?
Well, if you have all these, you'll be in balance.
Very good guess, but no.
No.
Look at verse 7. The first three words.
Do not judge.
Do not judge. I just picked a little icon that could help you remind you, don't be judgmental. Why here? Didn't Jesus already cover hypocrisy? Why bring this up again about judging other people? This whole thing is about looking at yourself. He covered, don't worry about what other people think.
But we still do it.
Yeah, we still do it. This is like, this little section here is a very short section, in just in one paragraph, but it's like hypocrisy 2.0. Because the first hypocrisy was about fake religion. I'm going to church so that people can see, wow, he goes to church. I'm putting money in the offering so people can see, wow, he's putting money in the offering. But here, Jesus is saying, do that in secret, and so you're trying to do that in secret. Don't worry about your earthly needs. Just trust God and seek the kingdom. Now imagine that you're really doing that, and you're listening to this sermon, and you're submitting to this sermon, and you know that you need God's help, and you're starting to do it, and you're starting to really not worry and really focus on the kingdom. Now what happens is you've built up a righteousness that's not based on what other people think. Now it's starting to be real righteousness. And now you see other people who maybe are still doing things to be seen, and you're like, that is false. And you're looking at other people who are still worried about, oh shoot, how am I gonna, I don't know how God's gonna provide, I need, and you're like, you're not supposed to be worried about that stuff. And you see people worrying, and sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable, and you can't say, by the way, Matthew 6:33 says,
Why not?
you can say it, but here's the thing. It's just when you see people doing that, it's very tempting to feel more spiritual than them. It just is. And so this is a new kind of hypocrisy where it's not so much I'm fake, it's I'm real, but I'm looking down at you. So it's a more difficult, like I said, it's just every step of the way there's a new temptation to pride. Okay, so that doesn't mean you can never help people, but why look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye when you've got a log in your eye, right? Okay? But then it does say, first take the plank out of your own eye so you can see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. You can still help people. You can still say, I know, it's really hard. Let's just pray together that God will just take care of it, and then you won't have to worry.
Or don't judge others.
Right. This is a way to not be judgmental when you're trying to help them. You see somebody worrying about something, a physical need, instead of saying, you're not supposed to worry, you should trust God. Instead of saying that, say, let's pray together. That way you won't need to worry. It'll help you trust God. So then you're helping them and not judging them. Every time, it's always those two sides, that danger. Now, the whole point of this right here, look at your own eye first, buddy, right? That section, is to say, don't look at other people, look at yourself. So I've seen people use this to avoid self-reflection. Somebody says something that makes them convicted about something they're doing. If you say, hey, I noticed that I really think you should try to stop, I don't know, cheating on your spouse, or whatever you say. And they don't, well, why don't you look at your own life first? Check out the law in your eye before you start picking on me. Don't judge. They use it to not have to look at their own heart. You see that? That's the opposite of Jesus' point. Jesus' point is always look at yourself.
And I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and the favorite saying up there is clean up your own backyard first.
Right. Yes. But do they say it like this? Before I look down on someone else, I really need to clean up my own backyard. Is that how they say it? No. Whenever someone says, hey, get that eyesore out of my property line, they say, why don't you clean up your own backyard? They use it in the opposite way it's meant. The way it's supposed to be used is silently on yourself. When you're like, I cannot believe that person did that. Now, wait a minute. Maybe I should look at myself first before I look down on them.
They don't do it though.
Yes. But you don't. They do it.
They do it.
I don't do it.
I'm first.
Yeah. It's always a temptation.
Doesn't it depend on the issue? You have homosexuality in the church, you're certainly going to make a judgment.
He's going to actually get to that. But yeah. But what this sermon is about, it's not about homosexuality in the church. It's about each person looking at their own heart and pursuing the kingdom and pursuing righteousness on their own. I mean, that doesn't mean, and he does get to that. Look at verse 6. Don't give dogs what is sacred. Don't throw your pearls before pigs. There does need to be discretion. And you can see how you could take the don't worry thing too far where you're just foolish. And you could see how you could take the don't judge too far to where you're just like, hey, if my pastor wants to be gay, well, I'm not going to judge. You can take those too far. You still do need to have discretion. But notice the discretion gets one verse and the don't judge section gets triple the amount of text. Right there it shows you which the greater danger is. And believe me, the greater danger is pride, hypocrisy, and being judgmental and looking down on others.
Well, you got to think to yourself, God's going to take care of that. You don't have to.
Right. Yeah.
He knows that's
It-
what's going to happen.
Yeah. When people struggle with sins, if it elicits anger, that's a red flag. It should elicit compassion. And I need to go share the gospel with them. Not, oh, this is so terrible. Well, I'm not like that. It shouldn't elicit pride in your heart. It should be compassion. Okay, so we get to the final command. Now, before we talk about that, you can see on the chart, stay on pages 11, s'il vous plaît. We just got through the body of the sermon. About, Jesus fulfilling the law and, do all these things, not just externally, but in your heart. Be perfect for your heavenly Father is perfect. And don't do hypocrisy. Let everything be genuine. Store up treasures in heaven, not on earth. Don't worry about the things of this world. I mean, the sermon is very tightly, each of the main body parts are necessary. They're necessary. Righteousness, you have to deal with hypocrisy. You have to deal with the right rewards. And then you have to deal with worrying about heavenly things, not earthly things. You get through all of that. At this point, are you feeling excited to live in the kingdom and by the norms of the kingdom? Or are you feeling discouraged?
Should be excited.
You should be excited.
Kind of hard.
You're discouraged until you realize that Jesus already took care of that for you. But
Yeah,
still-
it's up to this point, there is a certain amount of excitement to realizing you can live just with purely in heart with only one thing in mind? I just want to live for Jesus. I just want to advance the kingdom. I'm going to let him worry about everything else. There is a certain excitement, and once you get the taste of righteousness, the wonder and how amazing it is. But all in all, by this point in the sermon, I'm feeling pretty discouraged. That's a tall order, all that stuff, and never once feel proud about it. Always keeping that opening line, blessed are the poor in spirit, always keeping that in mind with every single one of these commands, but doing them. And then comes this: ask, seek, and knock. What an encouragement at this point in the sermon to say, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened. Everyone who asks receives. Now, when I was a kid, I thought, yes, I can get that action figure I want. I just have to ask God for it. I remember doing that. But in the flow of the sermon, what he's talking about is, if you want this kind of righteousness, just ask God. Just seek it, and you will find it. Just hunger for it, and you will be filled.
A lot of people don't want to do that, though.
Yeah. But the question is, do you want to do it? That's what we have to keep in mind at all times. This is discouraging, but I just have to ask. Now, why, can you see why this ask, seek, knock section would immediately be preceded by the don't judge others section?
Because you can't do it yourself. When you read all that, you're thinking, and then he ends by saying, but if you ask me to help you, if you seek me and put me first, then I will open the door, you can come in and I'll help you be righteous.
Right. Yes. Yeah. They require you to be poor in spirit. The way to not feel judgmental is to realize I have to ask for this. I cannot do this on my own. If you try to do it on your own, and people do, right? They hear the word and they rejoice, and yes, I'm a Christian, it's so great, I'm going to do everything. And they get discouraged, so they're doing it on their own strength.
God wants
They fall away.
us. He wants to do things
Yeah.
for his children.
So, and when you realize that you need his help, and actually not just his help, not like God's my assistant, I'm pretty good, I just need a little nudge from God. He does it through you. He prepared in advance the works of righteousness for you to do. We were saved from sins to good works. We have to ask, and he does it through us. By his power, that's what helps you not be judgmental. That's the connection there.
Mine has a little note as it being an encouragement to pray. I kind of, for one time, saw that. Said, well, he's telling you to ask God for things. Well, you've got to sit down and talk to him in order to do that.
Yeah.
And if you have all this stuff in mind, your perspective of how you're going to talk to him is better instead of just, hey, I want this. It's like, I realize I failed, but I do have some, it struck me as that is a good way to start.
Yes, actually, that's a great point. If you just read those verses alone, ask and it'll be given, seek and you will find, knock and it'll be opened, you might be thinking, I want a boat. God, I'm asking you for a boat. Right? You might just, but when you see it in the context of the whole sermon as a whole, all of a sudden you say, now I know what he's talking about asking for. Because at this point in the sermon, I know exactly what I need. I need help.
Well, God sometimes lets you have your way just so you can see that he was right.
That's true. That's true. That has happened to me many times. Okay, so this is the summation, the climax, and also the inclusio. Ruth, you're doing a great job. Could you read 9, 10, and 11? It's on page 12.
Okay, which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? 10, or if he asks...
I'm sorry. No, verse 12.
Oh, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets.
So I didn't even know until like my adult life that golden rule was from Jesus. I just heard people say that in public school. But in everything, do unto others what you would have them do unto you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. So the hard thing is not knowing the Bible super well, right? Like they were essentially trying to memorize the Old Testament. And then that sums it up. Do to others what you would have them do to you. And that's also the inclusio. Remember this, the body of the sermon started with the law and the prophets. I'm not come to abolish them. It ends, the body of the sermon ends with, this sums up the law and the prophets. Just do for others what you'd have them do for you. Okay. So that ends the body of the sermon, and now the conclusion is the two ways, right? The whole rest of the sermon, he talks about two paths, two gates, two trees, two claims, and two houses. Now, I'm sure you know this, right? You know, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. And then, you know, by their fruit, the two kind of fruits. Good tree and a bad tree produce good fruit and bad fruit. Two kinds of builders, two kinds of foundations. One built on the sand, it was empty. One built on the sand, one built on the rock. Two houses. One house was destroyed, the other house stood firm. Why at the end of this sermon was this repetition of, there's only two. Because we're out of time, so I'll just tell you. Because the worst thing you could do would be to listen to this greatest sermon ever preached and think, wow, I need to improve a little bit. I need to work on that.
So this is
there's no third option. It's all or nothing. You're on the broad road or you're on the narrow road. You're building your life on sand or on a rock. It's very important that you don't think, okay, yeah, I need to work on some of those things. I'm a little bit proud, so I'll try to work on that. What you need to do is get down on your knees and say, God, you got to do this, because there's so many things in here that I'm not doing. I'm worrying. I'm caring more about the things of this world than the things of heaven.
You know, Jake, when you speak of that, it really just seals to your heart the significance of Christ coming. Because without Christ, we just have no way of fulfilling. The Beatitudes just not only show you how you should live and how you should treat others, but it's the basis of your salvation. You have to reflect on your own heart. It's not the guy sitting next to you or down the road. Salvation comes to you through Christ alone. And I think that just seals this.
That's exactly right.